At 2:13 a.m., my trembling hands nearly dropped the phone when the voice said, "Rob, it's me, Danny." But my brother Daniel had been buried 22 years ago on a gray October morning by the Pacific. The room smelled faintly of instant coffee and the lemon cleaner I'd used earlier, but now that smell turned sour in my throat. My heart hammered, so hard that the bed creaked beneath me. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, the tremor in my hand making the plastic click against my hearing aid. Outside, Vancouver rain whispered against the window, steady and cold, the same kind that fell the day they lowered his coffin. "Who is this?" I managed. "You know who?" The voice said, softer this time. "Check your messages. I sent you a photo." I fumbled with the screen, my thumb jerking uncontrollably. A Parkinson's twitch I'd learned to live with. A new text glowed back at me. "I'm sorry." Attached was a blurred photo of a man standing in front of a neon-lit diner. The outline of his face, the slope of his shoulders, they matched the brother I'd lost to the sea. The air in my apartment felt suddenly thinner. The smell of rain to the half-open window reminded me of the tin-roofed cabin we'd spent summers in as kids. Daniel had always loved the sound of rain on metal, said it made him feel alive. My pulse thudded in my temples. "Danny?" I whispered. He laughed. That same rough, chest-deep laugh that used to echo through our childhood home when we'd sneak Mom's blueberry pancakes before Sunday service. "Still call me that, huh?" he said. "Meet me downtown. East Hastings. I can explain." The line went dead before I could reply. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the photo, feeling the tremor in my hands grow worse. Every logical bone in my body screamed impossible. DNA had confirmed the remains back in 2003. The RCMP report was clear. Body recovered near Tofino. Dental match. Next of kin notified. Case closed. But something inside me, maybe guilt, maybe hope, cracked open. I shuffled toward the mantel. Patricia's urn sat there beside a framed picture of the three of us, taken at Stanley Park. She'd been gone 8 years now. My reflection flickered in the glass, a bent old man chasing ghosts. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Corner of Hastings and Maine. By sunrise, the smell of damp city air crept through the cracks of the old window. The clock read 2:27 a.m. I pulled on my trench coat, slipped my father's pocket watch into my vest, and stood still long enough to feel the metal cool against my chest. I learned something that day about family that would change me forever. The apartment door's old latch clicked behind me as I stepped into the night. Vancouver streets were slick, the orange glow of street lamps bleeding across puddles. The sound of my own breath mixed with the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers as I started the car. Part of me whispered this is madness. Another part, the brother who'd spent half his life talking to a grave, refused to stay home. By the time I hit the Kokala Highway, dawn was still hours away. The rain intensified, pounding the windshield so hard I could smell wet asphalt through the vents. My knuckles ached on the steering wheel. The tremor steadied, almost calmed, as if my body recognized a motion of purpose. I parked near East Hastings just before 4. The place was as bleak as ever. Dim streetlights reflecting off puddles, a siren wailing somewhere in the distance. My old Tim Hortons cup rolled under the seat as I reached for the door handle. I didn't know what I expected, a scam artist, a hallucination, maybe my own guilt taking form. But the moment I stepped out into the rain, I felt something shift in the air, a pressure, a hum I couldn't explain. Under the flickering light outside a rundown shelter, a tall figure waited. Hood up, shoulders hunched, but even from across the street I could see the shape of his jaw, the familiar tilt of his head. My legs felt weak. The smell of wet pavement filled my lungs. I pressed the pocket watch between my fingers, and for the first time in 22 years, it stopped ticking. I took one step forward, then another. When he turned, I saw his face. Same blue eyes, same scar under the brow from the time he'd fallen off Dad's workbench. Danny? I croaked. He smiled faintly, rain streaking down his cheeks like tears. I reached for him, heart pounding so hard it hurt, but something in his gaze froze me. Because if that was really my brother standing there, whose body had I buried all those years ago? It was 4:07 a.m. when I finally crossed the street, rainwater seeping through cracks in my old leather shoes. The man under the flickering light didn't move, just watched me with the same quiet patience Daniel had when we were kids fishing off in the Nanaimo Pier. My hands trembled so badly I had to shove them into my coat pockets. Daniel? I said again, softer this time. He nodded once, water dripping from his hood. It's me, Rob. I didn't think you'd come. The sound of traffic from Hastings mixed with the hiss of the rain on asphalt. Somewhere nearby, a bus wheezed to a stop, letting off a cloud of diesel that burned my throat. The smell brought me back to our childhood garage. Dad working on his old Chevy. Daniel handing him wrenches too big for his little hands. But this man, this stranger with my brother's face, looked different. His cheeks were hollow, skin leathery, his beard streaked with gray. Still, the eyes, the same clear blue I'd seen in the coffin before they closed it. I saw your funeral. I whispered. I carried your casket. The RCMP confirmed. I know what they said, he interrupted. His voice cracked, older but unmistakable. It wasn't me they found. The words struck harder than the rain. Then who? He stepped forward, lowering his hood. The streetlight caught the left side of his neck, and there was a faint crescent-shaped birthmark on his shoulder blade, just above the collarbone. The exact same one Mom used to kiss goodnight when he was little. My breath caught. My heart hammered in my ears. How is this possible? I asked. He hesitated. I don't know how to explain it all here. I shouldn't even be out. Can we go somewhere private? Every instinct told me to leave, to get back in my car, call the police, call a doctor, but something in his tone was desperate, frightened, not rehearsed. We ducked into a 24-hour diner a few blocks away. The sign above the door flickered like a bad memory. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee. A waitress glanced at us without recognition, as if men meeting ghosts were a common thing in Vancouver at dawn. We sat by the window. My hands wrapped around the steaming mug the waitress slid over, grateful for its heat. Across from me, Daniel fidgeted with a napkin, twisting it until it tore. I was taken, he said finally. After the storm, someone pulled me out. I don't remember much after that. Woke up in a hospital near Kamloops months later. They said my ID didn't match. They called me someone else. I stared. 22 years, Danny. You didn't think to call? I tried, he said, his eyes glistening. But every time I did, something stopped me. People followed me, watched me. I thought they'd come after you, too. It sounded insane. But as he spoke, fragments of memory floated back. The RCMP report that had one page blacked out, the coroner who'd refused to let me view the body for long. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to believe him. The part that had buried my brother wasn't ready to dig him up again. He reached into his coat and slid something across the table. A tarnished pocket knife, engraved with our father's initials. You gave me this on my 16th birthday, he said quietly. Said it was time I learned to fix things on my own. I stared at it, the metal cold under my trembling fingers. The blade was dull, nicked in the same place I remembered. The diner lights flickered as thunder rolled somewhere over the city. Where have you been living? I asked. Mostly shelters. Sometimes with people who owed me favors. He looked away, voice low. But someone's been watching me, Rob. They don't want me to talk. The waitress refilled our cups. The smell of burnt coffee turned my stomach. My hands clenched around a mug until heat bit into my skin, the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. But belief meant rewriting 22 years of grief. It meant admitting I'd mourned a stranger. The diner clock ticked toward 5 a.m. Outside, The rain slowed, turning to mist that painted the window silver. He reached across the table. "You have to see something," he said. "Proof. Meet me at Lionsgate Hospital. Basement records room. Noon. Don't tell anyone." I didn't move. Couldn't. "I didn't know if you believed me," he said. "I'm not sure I can believe you," I replied. He stood, pulling the hood back up. "You will." I watched him disappear into the gray dawn, the door chime echoing behind him. The smell of his wet jacket, sea salt and cold air, lingered long after he was gone. I sat there, hands trembling so hard the spoon rattled in the cup. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out Dad's pocket watch. The hands had started ticking again. I didn't realize I was crying until the first tear hit the table. But the real question wasn't whether Daniel was alive. It was who had wanted him gone for 22 years. The spoon slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. And somewhere in that quiet diner, I swear I heard a voice whisper my name. It was 11:46 a.m. when I parked in front of Lionsgate Hospital, the same place where they confirmed Daniel's death all those years ago. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of Vancouver morning that felt more like memory than weather. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys when I locked the car. Inside the lobby, the smell of antiseptic hit me like a ghost. The sharp, sterile scent dragged me back to 2003, that endless week when Patricia and I signed the release papers for Daniel's remains. I could still hear the echo of her sobs down that hallway, the squeak of her shoes against the linoleum. Now I walked the same floor, but this time alone. The receptionist barely looked up when I asked for the basement records room. Down the service elevator, past the morgue, she said flatly. The word morgue twisted my stomach. I followed the corridor, every step sounding louder than the last. My palms were slick, my throat dry. When I reached the records door, it was slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped out, the metallic smell of paper, dust, and faint bleach. Daniel was already there. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. A thin scar ran along his jawline, one I didn't remember. "You came," he said, still not sure why. I muttered. He opened a cardboard box on the table, its flaps yellowed and soft with age. "This is a file they kept sealed," he said. "RCMP case number 93 to 4418. Our case." I froze. That number. I'd seen it on every letter, every document tied to Daniel's death. "How did you get this?" "Someone in records owed me a favor," he said. "Look." He handed me a stack of photocopies. The first was a coroner's report, dated October 14th, 2003. I skimmed the words. Male, approximately 35, cause of death, drowning. Identity confirmed by dental comparison. But then my eye caught the next line. Dental records submitted by Dr. M. Leary, Nanaimo Clinic, on behalf of next of kin, Daniel McKenna. I blinked. "You were listed as submitting your own records." Daniel nodded grimly. "Exactly." I flipped through the pages, my fingertips leaving small tremor marks on the paper. Another document. A death certificate. Stamped provisional pending DNA confirmation. But they told me it was confirmed. I whispered. Daniel slid a manila envelope toward me. Inside was a DNA results sheet, an original copy, not the one I'd received. It was dated 2 days after the supposed confirmation. The test compared 2 samples, one from the recovered body, one from an RCMP database entry belonging to Daniel McKenna. The probability reading wasn't 99.9%, as I'd been told. It was 41%, inconclusive. A chill crawled up my spine. "Someone changed it," Daniel said. "Someone wanted you to think I was dead." I stared at the form. My fingertips tingled from the cold of the paper. "Why?" I asked. "That's what I've been trying to find out." He pulled another sheet from the box, a financial form this time. "You remember Dad's company, the sale after he passed?" "Of course." I'd handled the liquidation. Half went to Daniel's supposed estate, Half to me. He pointed at the signature line. That's not yours. That's a forgery. I leaned closer. The signature looked like mine. Same shaky loops, same hes and R. But something was off. The pressure, the angle. Someone had copied it. My throat felt dry as sand. You're saying someone faked your death to steal Dad's estate? Daniel nodded. $500,000. Funneled through a numbered account in 2004. Whoever did it needed both our names. Mine dead, yours alive. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for balance. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting the room in pale blue shadows. For 22 years, I'd lived with grief. Now I felt something far worse. Manipulation. Part of me wanted to call the RCMP immediately. The part that had trusted the system wasn't ready to face how deeply it had failed. Daniel closed the box. I've been digging into it for months. There's more bank records, signatures, even a revision filed in Vancouver court. But if I move too fast, they'll know I'm alive. And if they know, they'll come after you. Who's they? He hesitated. That's what noon tomorrow is for. Someone wants to meet you. A lawyer who handled his estate back then. He says he's been waiting for me to come back. I stare at him, pulse thudding in my ears. You trust him? No, he said, but he knows the truth. A sound echoed from the hallway. The slow click of boots on tile. Both of us turned. The smell of disinfectant grew sharper. Daniel whispered, "We have to go. Now." He shoved the envelope into my hand and pushed me toward the side door. As we stepped into the service corridor, a voice called out behind us, deep and firm. "Excuse me, gentlemen. RCMP. I need to ask you a few questions." I froze. Daniel's grip tightened on my sleeve. "Don't say a word," he hissed. We turned. A tall officer in uniform stood under the humming light, his badge catching the glare. He looked straight at Daniel. "I thought you were dead," the officer said. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah," he murmured. "So did I." He turned and bolted down the corridor. Instinct took over. I ran after him. The echo of our footsteps mixed with the sound of the officer's radio crackling to life. I clutched the envelope against my chest, my heart hammering like it might burst. When we reached the exit, Daniel stopped, face pale under the fluorescent glow. "They know now," he said. "We don't have much time." Then he shoved me through the door into the cold daylight. The papers fluttered in my shaking hands. I looked down at the DNA report, rain blurring the ink. The number 41% stared back at me, mocking impossible. True. If Daniel wasn't dead and the records were forged, then who had the power to rewrite death itself? It was 9:32 a.m. when I walked into the downtown RCMP detachment off Cordova Street, rain still clinging to my coat. My hands trembled so badly that I could barely sign the visitor log. The constable behind the glass gave me a cautious look, the kind they save for people on the edge of something terrible. The smell of damp wool and old coffee filled the lobby. Somewhere in the back, a phone rang twice, then stopped. "I need to report identity fraud," I said. My voice cracked. "And possibly a 22-year-old mistake involving a death certificate." She blinked. "That's quite a statement, sir. Do you have documentation?" I slid the soggy envelope onto the counter. Inside, the DNA report, forged will, and the photocopy of the coroner's file. The constable's brows knitted. "Wait here," she said, disappearing behind the door. While I waited, the hum of fluorescent lights pressed against my skull. My fingers traced the smooth edge of the pocket watch in my coat, the one that had stopped ticking last night when I saw Daniel. I half expected it to start again any second. After what felt like forever, a man in a dark suit came out. "Mr. McKenna?" he asked. "Detective Sergeant Paul LeDuc." He gestured toward a small interview room. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of disinfectant. He closed the door and sat opposite me, flipping open a notepad. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I did. About to call at 2:13 a.m. The text, the meeting on Hastings, the box of documents at Lionsgate Hospital. I left out only one thing, Daniel's warning about being watched. When I finished, LeDuc leaned back. You're telling me your brother, Daniel McKenna, declared deceased in 2003, is alive? Yes. He studied me for a long time. You understand how extraordinary that claim is? I buried him, I said quietly, or thought I did. He picked up the DNA report, his thumb smudging the corner. These are copies, not originals. We'll have to verify chain of custody before we can act on them. Of course. My throat felt dry. But if they're real, then someone falsified a death certification, he said. That's not small. That's federal crime territory. He tapped his pen against the paper. Tick, 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 like a metronome of disbelief. Who else has seen your brother? Just me, and maybe the officer who confronted us yesterday at Lionsgate. I checked. LeDuc said, no RCMP officer was dispatched there yesterday morning. My blood ran cold. Then who was he? That's what I'd like to know. The ticking of the pen stopped. The silence between us stretched until I heard only the faint squeak of the ventilation fan. Finally, he said, if your brother's truly alive, Mr. McKenna, I'll find him. But I'll need you to stay put for now. Don't contact him. Don't go digging on your own. As he spoke, my phone buzzed in my pocket. One new text from an unknown number. Don't trust the police. Meet the lawyer. Noon sharp. I pocketed the phone before LeDuc noticed. Leaving the station, I stepped into the drizzle. The air smelled of wet asphalt and diesel. The same scent that filled my lungs when I first heard Daniel's voice. I crossed the street to Tim Hortons, ordered a black coffee, and sat near the window. The warmth of the cup steadied my shaking hands. Outside, umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers in the rain. The lawyer Daniel had mentioned, Michael Avery, QC, had offices near West Pender. I found his number online and called. A calm male voice answered. Mr. Avery is expecting you, he said before I even introduced myself. The line went dead. When I arrived, the receptionist, a woman with silver hair and a practiced smile, led me down a quiet hall. The carpet muffled every step. The smell of furniture polish and paper filled the air. Avery's office was lined with books that looked older than I was. He stood by the window, suit immaculate, face pale as parchment. Robert, he said smoothly, you look just like your brother. I froze. You know Daniel? We met years ago, before his disappearance. He gestured toward a leather chair. Sit. We have much to discuss. As I did, he opened a drawer and pulled out a brown envelope, identical to the one Daniel had shown me. Your brother wasn't wrong about this state, he said. Someone forged both your signatures. But it wasn't just about money. He slid a document across the desk, a corporate deed transfer dated October 10th, 2003, for days before Daniel's supposed death. Your father's company wasn't sold, Avery said. It was absorbed by a numbered shell connected to a developer in Ontario. Guess who signed the authorization? My stomach turned. Who? Avery looked up, his eyes steady. Your wife, Patricia. The room spun. That's impossible. She didn't even handle the finances. I'm afraid the documents say otherwise. And her notarization was verified by a court clerk in Nanaimo. My heart pounded. The air seemed to vanish from the room. She must have been forced, I said, or tricked. Perhaps, he said softly, but the trail doesn't end there. That numbered company, it was dissolved in 2005. The funds were routed through multiple accounts, one belonging to an unknown party in Vancouver. The signature matches hers, but the witness initials match yours. I stared at him, chest tight, mind racing. You're saying someone used both our identities, mine and Patricia's, to steal everything? Or to hide something far worse, Avery said. The smell of his aftershave, sandalwood and coal metal, filled my head. My fingers dug into the armrest. What would you have done in my situation? Comment below. I read every response. Avery rose and handed me a key. This opens a storage unit on Powell Street. Your brother left something there before he disappeared. Don't go alone. As I stood to leave, thunder cracked over the harbor, rattling the windows. I turned to ask one more question, but Avery was gone. The office door behind me stood half open, swaying slightly in the draft. I stepped forward, the key cold in my palm, and noticed a faint outline of muddy footprints leading toward the back exit. 2 sets. One larger, one smaller. I followed them to the hallway, where they vanished into nothing. Then I saw it, lying on the floor beneath the coat rack. A small, silver-charmed Patricia used to wear on her bracelet. A crescent moon. My throat closed. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The metal was still warm. If Patricia had been part of this, or worse, if she'd faked more than one death, then who else was still alive? The lights flickered once, and the pocket watch in my coat ticked back to life. It was 11:46 p.m. when I finally reached Powell Street. The key Avery had given me glinting under the streetlight like a tiny shard of truth. My heart was pounding. Not from fear this time, but from the grim certainty that I was about to uncover something that would make everything worse. The air was sharp with sea salt and oil. Somewhere beyond the docks, a freight train groaned across the tracks, dragging its loneliness behind it. I hadn't told the police where I was going. I hadn't told anyone. I pulled into a narrow alley behind the storage complex, a gray slab of concrete and rust. The fluorescent light above the gate flickered in rhythm with my pulse. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock, the metal cold enough to bite my fingers. Unit 47B. When the door rolled up, the smell hit me first, a stale mix of dust, engine oil, and something faintly metallic. A single overhead bulb buzzed weakly, throwing pale yellow light across a room full of boxes. At first glance, it looked like junk. Old photo albums, file folders, a suitcase. But in the corner, half buried under a tarp, was a wooden chest with McKenna and Sons Engineering carved into the lid. My father's company. I knelt and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of bound ledgers, envelopes, and a black notebook. Its pages were filled with numbers, coordinates, dates, initials, some of them circled in red ink. The handwriting wasn't my father's. It was Patricia's. My breath caught. She had kept her handwriting neat even when angry, every loop precise, every letter calm. But here, the lines were jagged, frantic. They lied to us. Daniel isn't dead. He was moved. If you're reading this, I failed to stop them. My stomach twisted. I flipped through more pages. Receipts, maps of Vancouver Island, photocopies of offshore bank transfers. At the bottom of the chest lay a small envelope marked for Robert, only when it's safe. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, Daniel, standing beside Patricia, dated August 2003, 2 months before his death. They were smiling. Behind them was a building sign that read, Hartwell Rehabilitation Institute, Nanaimo. I stared at it, the edges of reality beginning to blur. If Daniel had been in some kind of rehabilitation center, who declared him dead? The sound of a door closing snapped me back. I froze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed to the corridor outside. I turned off the light, pressed myself against the wall. The faint beam of a flashlight swept across the metal door, stopping just short of the crack. Then a voice, low, familiar, and hoarse. Robert, I told you not to come alone. It was Daniel. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then I stepped forward and pulled the door open just enough to see him. Older, thinner, his face half lit by the flashlight. What is this place? I whispered. He motioned for silence. You shouldn't have talked to Avery. He's not who he says he is. My throat tightened. He gave me this key. Daniel's eyes darkened. Exactly. That's how they find people, Robert. They use the same names, the same trails. I could barely breathe. Who are they? Before he could answer, a sound like gunfire cracked through the hallway, the deafening metallic echo of something striking the storage doors. Daniel grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the chest. "Stay down," he hissed. Another shot. Sparks danced off the metal. I pressed my hands over my ears. "Who's shooting?" "Not cops," Daniel said through his teeth. "These are the same people who forged our deaths. They want the files." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, pressing it into my palm. "If I don't make it out, you take this to a man named Dr. Heller at UBC. He knows everything." I shook my head. "No, you're coming with me." But his eyes said otherwise. The next moment, the bulb shattered. The world went black. I heard him shove me toward the exit, felt his hand on my shoulder, then nothing. When I stumbled outside, gasping for air, the night was empty except for the sound of sirens in the distance. The door to the storage unit was hanging open. Smoke drifted out. Inside, the chest was gone. Daniel was gone. Only one thing remained on the ground, the broken pocket watch, its glass cracked, ticking faintly. I picked it up, staring at the second hand as it twitched in uneven rhythm. That's when my phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. The files are safe. Don't look for me. Trust Heller. The timestamp read 11:58 p.m., the exact moment the watch had stopped again. For the first time since this all began, I realized I wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. I was being led, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, through a maze someone had designed years ago. And the one person I had buried might be the only one who could lead me out alive. It was 9:12 a.m. when I pulled into the University of British Columbia's West Campus. The morning fog still clinging to the edges of the buildings like smoke that refused to clear. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel all the way from downtown Vancouver. The pocket watch Daniel had left behind sat on the passenger seat, cracked, silent, and heavy as guilt. The smell of wet cedar and coffee drifted through the parking lot. A group of students hurried past, laughing, backpacks bouncing. It all felt impossibly normal. How could the world keep turning when mine had stopped 22 years ago? Inside the Biomedical Research Center, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, sterile and bright. I asked the receptionist for Dr. Peter Heller. She typed his name with mechanical precision, then frowned. "He doesn't take walk-ins, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice lower than I intended. But my son sent me. Something in the way I said it, or maybe the way my voice cracked, made her pause. She picked up the phone, murmured into it, then nodded for me to sit. My legs trembled as I lowered myself into the chair, the plastic creaking under my weight. 10 minutes later, a tall, balding man in a lab coat appeared. Late 50s, maybe. Sharp eyes, tired face. "Mr. McKenna," he said, "I'm Dr. Heller. Come with me." We walked through a series of sterile corridors that smelled of antiseptic and old paper, until we reached a small office lined with medical journals. On the desk sat a cup of Tim Hortons coffee, untouched and cooling. "Daniel told me you might come," he said. I froze mid-step. "He's alive." Heller sighed. Alive is the complicated word in this situation. He gestured for me to sit. "Before you ask anything, I need to know what you found." I placed a USB drive on his desk. "He gave me this. Said you'd understand." Heller plugged it in, the computer fan whirring to life. A folder opened, labeled Project Sparrow, Phase 3. Inside were hundreds of encrypted files, each tagged with dates between 2001 and 2003. My pulse thudded in my ears. "What the hell is Project Sparrow?" He hesitated. "An experimental neuroregenerative program. It was designed to help trauma victims regain cognitive function through induced identity simulation." I blinked. "English, please." He exhaled slowly. "They used volunteers who'd suffered brain injuries, people whose memories were fractured. But the funding came from a private engineering firm, McKenna and Sons. My company? I whispered. My family's company? He nodded grimly. Your wife, Patricia, was a financial liaison. She discovered that Daniel wasn't just funding the project. He'd been entered into it after his accident. The words sliced through me like glass. You're saying he never died because you used him as an experiment? Heller didn't answer. He clicked a video file instead. A grainy image filled the screen. Daniel, maybe 17, sitting in a white hospital gown, electrodes attached to his scalp. His eyes darted nervously as a voice off camera said, "Tell us your name." Daniel hesitated. I don't remember. My throat constricted. The smell of antiseptic. The faint hum of machinery. It all came rushing back to that hospital room in 2003 where Patricia and I had watched the monitors flatline. But what if that death had been staged? I learned something that day about family that would change me forever. The thought hit like a blow. I had spent 2 decades grieving a lie. At the halfway point, my mind fractured between anger and disbelief. Part of me wanted to destroy every one of these files. The part that had buried my son wasn't ready to face that I had mourned the wrong death. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles went white. Where is he now? Heller leaned back, eyes shadowed. He escaped before the facility was shut down. He's been in hiding ever since. He comes to me when he needs medicine. But now, whoever's after him wants those files erased permanently. The sound of distant rain tapping the window filled the silence between us. What would they gain from killing him now? I asked. Not gain, Heller said softly. Erasure. If Project Sparrow resurfaces, there'll be lawsuits, government fallout, and you, Mr. McKenna, will lose what's left of your company's reputation. My voice broke into a whisper. They already took my family. What else is there to lose? He studied me for a long time. You can still choose what truth gets remembered. I stood, pocketing the drive. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound cutting through the tension. Then I'll make sure Daniel's story is told. As I reached the door, Heller called out, "Be careful who you trust, Robert. They've been watching since the first call." I froze. They? He nodded toward the hallway window. A black SUV was parked across the street, its engine idling. My pulse spiked. I pushed out of the office, heart racing, vision tunneling. By the time I reached the exit, the SUV was gone, just wet tire tracks glistening under gray Vancouver drizzle. I looked down at the pocket watch in my hand. The second hand had started moving again. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure whether that was a good sign. It was 8:41 p.m. when I parked outside Avery Grant's downtown office, the same place I'd first signed the documents confirming Daniel's death 22 years ago. The rain had turned relentless, hammering the windshield in silver streaks. The wipers squeaked like a heartbeat that wouldn't calm down. Inside my coat pocket, the USB drive burned against my skin, not hot but heavy, like it knew what it carried. The office building's lobby smelled faintly of bleach and carpet glue, a smell I'd come to associate with cover-ups. The security guard barely looked up as I walked in. My shoes left wet prints across the polished floor, echoing through the empty hall, like proof I still existed. Avery's door was half open, light spilling into the corridor. He looked up from his desk, startled, or maybe guilty. "Robert," he said, standing too quickly. "I was just about to call you." I shut the door behind me. The click louder than it should have been. "You lied to me." He straightened his tie. "About what exactly?" I tossed the pocket watch onto his desk. The cracked glass caught the fluorescent light, scattering it across the room. About my son. About Patricia. About Project Sparrow. For a moment, his expression didn't change, the way men's faces don't when they practice hiding. Then he exhaled and sank into his chair. "You weren't supposed to find out." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You knew." "I helped arrange the paperwork," he admitted. "Your wife begged me to. Daniel wasn't dead, Robert, but he wasn't alive either. Patricia thought if the world believed he died, he'd be safe from the people funding the experiment. I gripped the back of the chair opposite him. My hand shook so violently I had to steady it with the other. Safe from who? He hesitated. The investors, the same ones who kept McKenna and Sons alive after the 2001 recession. You think that money came from clean hands? The office was too quiet. Even the hum of the ceiling vents seemed to fade. So you all just decided, I said slowly, that I didn't need to know my son was alive? Avery swallowed. Patricia made me swear. She said you'd never stop looking if you knew. And she was right. The sound of rain against the window grew louder, steady, accusing. I learned something that day about family that would change me forever. I'd spent years telling myself forgiveness was a virtue. Now it felt like a weapon used against me. Avery stood and opened a drawer. He pulled out a thin file, slid across the desk. You want to see this? Inside were copies of old emails between Patricia and a government contact. Words like neural continuity, memory restoration protocols, and containment clearance leapt off the page. She wasn't just protecting Daniel, Avery said. She was part of it. I stared at the papers until the words blurred. My pulse thudded in my ears. Part of me wanted to burn the whole file right there. The part that had buried my wife wasn't ready to believe she'd lied to save herself. When I looked up, Avery was holding something else. A sealed envelope with my name written in Patricia's handwriting. Daniel left this with me, he said quietly. He said you'd come eventually. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten page. Robert, if you're reading this, it means the truth has found you. I did what I had to do to protect him. To protect you. Forgive me for the years I stole. Love doesn't always look like honesty. P.S. Don't trust anyone who drinks black coffee after 9 p.m. That's how they meet. I looked up slowly. Avery's coffee cup, still steaming, sat on the desk. The clock on the wall read 8:55 p.m. My stomach dropped. He followed my gaze, then smiled faintly, a smile I'd seen once before years ago, when he told me Daniel's body had been recovered. You really should have stayed out of this, Robert, he said softly. I moved first, lunging for the USB drive. But he was faster. He slammed his hand over it, knocking the pocket watch to the floor. The glass shattered, scattering time across the carpet. I didn't want it to end this way, he said, voice suddenly calm. But Daniel gave you too much. What did you do to him? I demanded. He looked almost regretful. I helped him disappear. Twice. Before I could answer, there was a noise outside. Footsteps, rapid and heavy, coming down the hall. Avery froze. They're early, he muttered. I backed toward the door, gripping the shattered watch. The footsteps grew louder. I didn't know if he believed me. Came a voice from the hallway. Daniel. Avery's face went pale. I'm not sure I can believe you. I whispered. Daniel stepped into the doorway, rain dripping from his hair, eyes blazing. Then watch me prove it. He threw something onto Avery's desk. Another flash drive, twin to mine. That one is everything. Every payment. Every name. Avery lunged, but I was faster this time. I swung the broken watch in my hand, the edge catching him across the temple. He collapsed against the desk with a sickening thud. The office fell silent except for the sound of rain. Daniel looked at me, chest heaving. What now? I asked. He nodded toward the window. Now we make it public. But as we turned to leave, the corridor lights flickered, and a voice over the building intercom said, Mr. McKenna, please remain where you are. The RCMP would like to ask you a few questions. Daniel's eyes widened. They found us. I reached for the door handle, pulse pounding. Outside, sirens wailed, closer this time. And somewhere behind us, Avery groaned and began to move. It was 6:07 a.m. when the world went quiet again, the kind of gray Vancouver morning that smelled of wet pavement, burnt coffee, and endings. The rain had finally stopped. but everything still glistened, as if the city itself hadn't decided whether to start over or give up. I sat on the hood of my car outside the RCMP station, hands cuffed in front of me, watching the steam rise from the asphalt. Across the street, the sun crept between the glass towers, pale and reluctant. They'd taken Daniel inside half an hour ago. I hadn't seen him since. One of the officers, Sergeant LeBlanc, stood nearby, his radio crackling. He had the kind of face that belonged in another time, honest but tired. When he spoke, his tone was less about suspicion and more about pity. "Mr. McKenna," he said, "you're lucky we got there when we did. Your lawyer's still unconscious. Another 2 minutes and we'd be writing a homicide report." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The smell of disinfectant drifting from the open station door brought everything back. The hospital in 2003. The paperwork. The death that never was. LeBlanc sighed. "You want my advice? Forget the files. Let the system handle it." I looked at him. The kind of look you give a man who still believes systems can save people. The system made this mess. He studied me for a moment, then motioned to another officer. "Get him inside." The holding room was small, sterile, and bright. I could hear the buzz of the fluorescent light overhead, steady and relentless. My tremor had returned. My hand shook so badly the cuffs rattled against the metal chair. On the table sat the USB drive, the second one, the one Daniel had thrown. An RCMP tech was trying to decrypt it. Every few minutes, the screen flickered with red text. "Encrypted with something called Sparrowlock," he muttered. "Never seen this level of protection. Someone didn't want these files opened." LeBlanc leaned over his shoulder. "Keep at it. Ottawa wants results by noon." I stared at the drive. Somewhere inside that tiny device was a story of my family's destruction, and maybe its salvation. Then, without warning, the computer beeped. The tech frowned. "Sir, it's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" LeBlanc snapped. The man pointed at the screen. "Self-erased. Triggered the moment we tried to access it." A hollow sound escaped my throat. Half laugh, half sob. "He wiped it." LeBlanc turned to me. "Who?" "My son." The officer's expression hardened. "Then your son just deleted federal evidence." I looked down at my trembling hands. "He's been trying to protect us since the day they used him." LeBlanc paused. He said something before we brought him in. "Asked me to give you this." He handed me a small folded note, smudged and damp. Inside, Daniel's handwriting, shaky, but his. "Dad, they'll never stop if the files exist. I made my choice. Don't look for me again. Tell Mom I understand now. Tell her I forgive her." I pressed the note between my palms, feeling the paper soften under my sweat. For the first time since this nightmare began, the trembling in my hands didn't come from Parkinson's. It came from heartbreak. They released me 2 hours later, no charges. Avery was alive, though concussed. The RCMP took over his firm. Project Sparrow was officially listed as an unverified conspiracy. The kind of phrase bureaucrats use to bury the truth forever. By noon, I was back home. The apartment felt smaller, emptier. The photo of Patricia and Daniel still sat on the mantel. But now I looked at it differently, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof of survival. I boiled water for instant coffee. The smell filled the room, bitter and grounding. On the table lay the broken pocket watch, its hands frozen at 11:58. The moment Daniel had first messaged me. I turned it over. Something I hadn't noticed before, an engraving beneath the scratches. For when time stands still, love keeps moving. I smiled just barely. Maybe Patricia had known all along that one day this watch would stop, not as a sign of death, but as a reminder that love outlasts the machinery around it. What would you have done in my situation? Comment below. I read every response. Outside, the sky began to clear, sunlight glinting off the wet glass towers. Somewhere out there, Daniel was alive and free, in whatever way a man like him could be. Maybe I'd never see him again. Maybe that was the point. As I stood by the window, coffee in hand, I looked at the mantel one last time. The pocket watch still sat beside the old photo, catching a shard of light. And for the first time in 22 years, I didn't need it to start ticking again. The pocket watch still sits on my shelf, waiting. Thanks for watching.